to address you for the next little bit on a little bit about my journey and also about something that is really on my mind. I heard it once said that mindset is more important than skill set. And I'll be honest, I actually didn't believe it to begin with. I didn't believe that the way you think is actually more important than the actions you can take. But then you realize that no action you have ever taken in your entire life came before you thought about it. It always came after you thought about it. Thinking obviously precedes action. But I didn't like it because I wanted to find the tool, the strategy, the tool, the tactic to create something incredible for my life and for my business. But here's one of the challenging things that I found. I found that nothing we're talking about here, no strategy, no implementation of a strategy will work unless if you work. And what do I mean by that? And I want to answer that by a question. Do you truly know who you are? This is something that I struggled with for a very long time, of really understanding who I am. And honestly, in the beginning of my entrepreneurial journey, I was not trying to solve problems for my clients. I was actually trying to solve my own problems. A lot of the content that you see me push out is something that I'm addressing that I'm struggling with in my life. So I produce content and I teach something about it because, as you know, when you teach something, you learn so much more from it than any other way of learning. Teachers are the greatest learners because teachers are not only teaching something and it solidifies it in your mind of what it's all about, but you're also implementing those things in your life. So I spent a lot of time really understanding, like, who am I? I know it's one of the biggest questions that we all have in our life is, who am I? And I don't mean like who you are as in, okay, my name is Eric Sorensen, I'm an entrepreneur. I mean like deep to the core, who you are, which is tied to what were you born to do. And I had a really interesting experience last week that just one transformational event changed my entire trajectory for my life because I'm deciding to change it, because I discovered at an even deeper level who I was and who I was meant to serve, the things that I was meant to do in this life. And it started off like, as Adora mentioned, I built a company up. And I didn't sell it for 70 million. No, it generated $70 million in business, but it was a decent sized company that I took years of 2x thinking, of just hustle, of just going to build over years. And I built this company up and I kept hitting this plateau. I could never get over this certain amount of revenue. I could just never do it. Every year I kept hitting that. Once I hit it, and it was an 8-figure number. So it wasn't a small number, but it required me to hustle. It required me to get in at 6 in the morning and sometimes not even leave till 10 p.m. at night. There were days that I didn't actually go home for 2 days and I didn't sleep because I was working, trying to build something great. I wish I knew then what I know now, that there is an accelerated path to your success by working not as hard. You can 10x your life and your business by doing less, not more. But I didn't know that at the time. And I remember there was an opportunity in my life where things were not going so well. And I had somebody approach me and said, hey, I want to buy your business. And at first I'm like, no, that's kind of like selling your child. Why would I ever want to sell my business? So he came to me and I decided, okay, I'll after just analyzing it for a little while, I decided to sell it. And the sell took about a year to take, to do, because it wasn't a small sell. And I remember the day that the transaction went through, and it was amazing. I had more money in the bank than I ever thought I would have in my life. And it was just an incredible experience for about 3 weeks. Now, I've heard people talk about this before. Tom Bilyeu all the time talks about, like, he said, I wasn't wealthy. I got all of my wealth in one moment when the wire transfer hit, and he sold a company for over $1 billion. I don't know what his portion was of that, but I'm sure it was a significant amount. And all of a sudden he had that feeling that I had. Now, when I heard people talk about this before, I thought, well, yes, that sounds great to say that it only lasted for 3 weeks, but that's because you have money. What about those of us that don't have money and we're struggling to make the impact, the income, and the influence that we want to have? What is that? I mean, what is there for us? And I always thought it was ridiculous when people would say things like that, until I actually experienced it and realized that it was real. Why? Because at the time, my identity was so intricately tied to the business that when I sold my business, I sold my soul. Now, that is a very wrong way to do this, obviously. I was misguided and misplaced in the impact that I wanted to have. But here's the interesting thing that happened. Because I was my business and it was me, I no longer had an identity, or at least I didn't think I did when I sold the business. And I went downhill really fast, meaning I didn't know what to do. I started trying to get involved in other businesses and it didn't go well. I got some business partners and went really, really south. And I just kept going downhill, downhill, downhill. And I didn't know what to make of my life. Yes, I had money in the bank. Yes, I had opportunity. But at the same time, I felt like I wasn't doing the thing that I was called to do. I believe that business is a calling. I believe that you are called to serve a people. And the intensity and the magnitude of the opposition is as equal to the intensity and the magnitude of the calling that you have. You know what I'm talking about? When you're trying to create something incredible, chaos always follows creation. It's almost like God or the universe or whatever you believe says, do you really want this? Every single entrepreneur that I've ever spoken to that has had a major breakthrough struggled to get there, had self-doubt, struggled with limiting beliefs, kept not doing the thing that they needed to do. We heard yesterday from Danny, who knew exactly what he needed to do for 6 months and didn't actually do it. And when he did it, he built a multi-million-dollar company because he finally did it. You know, sometimes the hardest thing for us to take action on is the thing that our soul most knows that it must do. Are we more afraid of failure, or is the reality that we're more afraid of success? As Marley said at the end of her speech, she said that it's time to take bold action, that it's time to do the thing that your soul already knows that it is meant to do. I truly believe that everybody here already deep down inside knows what to do. Sometimes it just takes a thought or a coach or a mentor or something to get you out of your own head and move to the thing that you were meant to do. I remember the day that this happened to me. I was struggling with all of these things, and I was trying to create this program and it didn't work. And I tried to create another program and it didn't work. I mean, I was a massively successful entrepreneur, and here I am failing at nearly everything that I did after I sold my business. And I spent several years. I didn't collect a single paycheck for, 2 or 3 or 4 years. And I was just trying to grasp at everything possible to try to make this work, because at the time I felt like I was being pulled to something greater. And I started to realize what I was meant to do. It's important that you know too, that for 15 years of running this business, I never attended a conference. I never read a book. I hated virtual events like this. I would have never been found on an event like this, let alone speaking at an event like this. And then I remember I got to a point where things were not working, where I was feeling totally disconnected with my identity, and I just felt lost. And I read a quote that changed my life. And it said that the scariest day of your life is the day you die, when the person you are meets the person you could have become. And that woke me up. So what did I do? The only thing I knew was I needed to reach as high as possible. So I went to the biggest mentors in the world. Fortunately, I had a little bit of a war chest to spend a few $100,000 in personal development. I started reading a book a week. I started I went to 7 Tony Robbins events in 1 year. I went to Brendan Burchard's things. I started studying with Tom Bilyeu. I started meeting some of these incredible people, and I started hiring coaches and trainers and trying to really understand, if I could really understand who I truly was and make the impact that I knew that I could make, I needed to discover the path to do it. And yet that still wasn't enough. I still spent a couple of years just in learning and growing. And don't get me wrong, it was an incredible experience. I learned a lot, but I still wasn't doing the thing that I knew I was born to do. And so finally, I had an opportunity to hire a coach. And this coach, it was $50,000 to hire this coach. Now, that is not chump change. That is a lot of money, obviously. So in doing this, I ended up realizing something really crazy. I went in to this pitch, and I knew this was the coach that I wanted to hire. $50,000 was a lot. And the first time I heard that number, I got scared. And you know what I did? I actually left the room and I went back to my hotel room. And I said, you know what? Even though I know this is what I need to do, I'm not going to do it. Why? Because of whatever, fear, etc. So I'm sitting in my hotel room and I just felt this feeling, this voice in my heart, not in my head, saying, you need to do this. So I called my wife and I said, hey, are you okay if I spend $50,000? which I never spent that much on coaching in my life. It was a crazy number. And of course, that's when you know you're married to a rock star. She's like, yes, if you believe this is right for you, go for it. And so I ran back into the room, and I was worried because they only had a few slots for this coaching program. And I went into the room and everybody was gone. And I'm like, oh no, I missed out. Then I went into and I found somebody that was there. I found one of their team members. And I said, is it full? Is it full? They're like, no, we have like 3 spots left. I said, great, I want one of them. And I gave them my credit card. And I spent 50 grand on this coaching program. They say that the transformation is in the transaction. Any of you ever heard that before? The transformation is in the transaction? If you have, put yes in the chat. Well, I experienced this for the very first time. I went back to my room, and the first thing that hit me was a lot of fear. Like, oh my gosh, did you do the right thing? Oh my goodness, you just spent 50 grand. Are you going to be able to get it back? But the craziest amount of confidence all of a sudden just entered my mind. It's almost like when you put money down on that big on something you believe in, it sort of like unlocks your belief. It unlocks your ability to do something. It's the craziest thing. I'd never experienced it before. And an idea came into my mind in that hotel room in Orlando that very night that changed my life. And it was an idea that I had. And all of a sudden, the idea for my program came, and I started feverishly, fervently writing for 2 or 3 hours, creating funnels, creating content, all of this in my hotel room. And I launched the program 2 weeks later. And I launched it through a platform I believe in, which is called live events, and generated $1 million in business in one day. We generated $406,000 in a coaching program. And then I ended up gaining a bunch of other clients after that. So we call that stomper math, meaning it wasn't like I got $1 million check in a day, but I generated $1 million in business that sometimes if you do like payment plans or whatever, you'll get over time. So it ended up being $1 million day for me in one day. You know, when I read the book, Be Your Future Self Now, which is right here by Dr. Benjamin Hardy, and he studied entrepreneurs, and he found that entrepreneurs that finally had that pivot point, that trigger point that finally shot them to that level of success, because most of us are stuck, right? We're having some successes, but we're bouncing that when we stay stuck and we can't seem to get past that brick wall. Anything we try to do, we can't get to the point where Anissa is, where she's making all kinds of money, has all kinds of businesses, and she's just doing it right, and she's not spending a lot of time on it anymore. Well, most of us struggle for a very long time to get there, and then something happens. And Dr. Benjamin Hardy said it's usually when somebody puts money down on usually hiring a coach that it unlocks that for them. And that became the pivot point. In other words, it was an investment in themselves to be able to get to the level of influence, impact, and income that they wanted to have. And that's exactly what happened to me. Well, fast forward. And last week, we had an incredible live event in Nashville where we had 2 days of incredible speakers. I reached out to Molly Bloom from Molly's Game, the movie. How many of you have ever seen the movie Molly's Game? Raise your hand. It's the real person behind the story. She was the one that did the underground gambling thing. I hung out with Molly for last week, got to know her a little bit. I started talking to her about human trafficking. She's like, I need to get involved. Tell me how I can get involved. She's like, I've spent a lot of my life running from things like the government, and now I'd like to spend my life running towards something. And I'm like, Molly, I got you. We will hook you up. Then I had Nancy Kerrigan, who, if you guys remember who she was a silver medalist in the Olympics twice. She was the one that had that issue with Tanya Harding. I had her speak. Dr. John Deloney, who has the second biggest radio program from the John Deloney show, spoke about mental health. And it was absolutely insane week. And it was the most transformational event that I've ever been a part of. Granted, it was my event. I get it. So I'm going to like it more than most people. But the feedback was unbelievable. Why? Because I decided to make a bold move. I decided to finally listen to that voice, unlock my potential. I hired the coach and I learned how to do live events, because I believe that live events are the fastest way to 100K months. Why? Because you can either, like Marley said, you can either do 1,000 videos to try to get 5 million views, or you can do one video to get 50 million views, or whatever the number was. Whatever the math was, it works the same. I decided to go all in on live events. I mean, I could do some webinars and sell a $200 product or a $2,500 product or a $10,000 product. Instead, I chose to do live events where I can sell a $10, $15, or a $25,000 product. I mean, think about it. How many of your lives would change with just one $25,000 client? Put me in the chat. Imagine if you had 10 $25,000 clients. Would your life change? Yes or no? Put 250K in the chat if that's you. That's why I love live events, because you have the ability through live events to make much more to a difference in the people's lives that you serve and much more income immediately. And that's what happened to me. I sold a 25K program 2 weeks after this transformational experience that I had. And I had, like I said, $400,000 in signups, plus then we ended up getting a ton more business from that event, which equaled about $1 million of business in that one day. Your life can change next week. Your life can change tomorrow. Your life can change today, both financially and through the ability for you to make the impact that you want to make. And so I had this experience, and it was absolutely insane last week. And then the interesting thing happened. When you are aligned with your calling, two things happen. Number one, you feel happy. How many of you don't feel that you're aligned with the thing that you were meant to do? Aligned with who you are, your authentic self, yourself put aligned in the chat. How many of you don't feel aligned? Actually, put not aligned in the chat. That's probably a better thing to put, more accurate. When you don't feel aligned, that is a great signal that you're on the wrong path. You're doing the thing that you should not do. You're spending time in things that you should not spend time in when you're not aligned. When I was on stage last week, there was an epiphany that said, Eric, this is where you belong. Teaching people, coaching people, training people on how they can have two things. One, an extraordinary business that leads to an extraordinary life. An extraordinary life to me means life on your terms. What if today or tomorrow you were able to wake up from your sleep and do anything you wanted to do? Money wasn't an issue. You're making the impact that you want to make. You can live life exactly how you want it, the freedom that you want to have. How many of you want that? Say freedom in the chat. And I'm sure all of you are like, yes, absolutely. So I was on the stage. I was online. The second thing that happens when you are aligned with your calling, miracles happen. Doors open. Opportunities come. And a miracle happened last week. I'm calling it the miracle on stage. And everybody that was there was posting about it, giving shout outs about it. And the entire audience was crying. I decided for the first time, and there's only twice that I've shared this story publicly. Once was here at Project Uprise because of the connection to human trafficking, about when I lost my adopted daughter to human trafficking in Haiti. Right before I was picking her up, she was taken from the orphanage. And I told that story on stage. I'll be honest, I had never shared it to that many people, never in a live in-person audience, and I was scared to death to do it. And I played a video. There was a news story that CBS did on me back 10 years ago on this. If you want to Google it, just Google Eric Sorensen Haiti Sandra. Sandra was the name of my daughter, and you'll be able to watch that video on YouTube. I played that video, then I went up and I told in depth the story of me losing this child, but then what it led to. And it was heart-wrenching and heartbreaking. Well, the very next day on stage, something happened that I will never forget. One of my platinum partners, so one of my clients that spent $25,000 to be in my program, said, hey, Eric, I want to say something on stage. Now, normally, you never say to an audience member, yes, you can come speak on stage in an impromptu manner. That never happens, but I had a feeling. And I said, okay. I said, I'll tell you what, we have a break right before our lunch break. I'm going to bring you on stage and, I'll give you just a few minutes to say what you wanted to say. And she said, great. So we get up there and I bring her up on stage and I'm kind of nervous because I have no idea what's about to happen. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I had this feeling. And she gets up there and says, hey, I was so touched by your story and for being vulnerable and telling us a story about Sandra and how you lost her in Haiti, that I want from my company and myself to donate $10,000 but I'm only going to donate it if somebody will match my $10,000. And that's what she said. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Next thing I know, the spotlights are on me. So it's really sometimes hard to see the audience. And I see a hand go up. And I know I actually knew this person. And she gets up and she says, I will match the $10,000. Wow. And then another person stands up and says, I'll match it. And another person says, I can't do 10, but I'll do 5. Another person stands up. And I have this all recorded, by the way. All of this is all on video. It's the craziest thing. Hopefully you'll have a chance to watch it. Another person stands up. I can't remember how many people stood up, but I brought every single person on stage. And just the feeling in the room, we're all crying. I literally fell down because I just got down because on the stage, because I'm not believing what's happening. And all of these people are clapping and cheering. And I looked at them and I said, as we got everybody on stage, as this all happened, I looked at them and I said, you guys are the real power of this event. You guys are the difference. And then they grabbed the mic and said, no, Eric, you are the difference. Now, I'm not here to argue whether I'm the difference or that they're the difference. That's not why I'm telling you this story. But I can tell you this, when you are aligned with the calling that you have and you're finally getting rid of the fears and the limiting beliefs that you have, or at least not necessarily getting rid of them, but taking action in spite of them, miracles happened. And we raised $150,000 in 10 minutes. I should have had this prepared before, but I think I have a picture of everybody on stage when this actually happened, and it was unbelievable. Let me see if I can share it to you guys, with you guys, if I can find it really quick. If I can't, that's okay. But it was absolutely a miracle. It was absolutely unbelievable, and it was an experience that I will never, ever, ever forget. I might not be able to find it. What I'll do is I'll try to find that picture and I'll show it to you guys so you can see this miracle that happened on stage. Then come to find out the next day, there were several other people that decided to donate on top of what was raised on stage. And it sent just so much social media presence and so many comments and so many different things that people were saying about this experience that they will never forget. And the great news is not a single dry eye in the entire audience. In fact, I was on a call with a client who brought her team to the event. There were 10 people in the team. And every single one of them said they were bawling their eyes out because of this experience. It was amazing. It was powerful. It was impactful. And we will never forget it. Again, let me repeat. When you are aligned with your calling, 2 things happen. Number 1, you'll feel completely happy because you feel like you're in love with what you're trying to do. Like Marley said, like she could spend all night doing what she knows she's called to do. I could as well. And the other thing too is doors open and miracles happen in your life when you're finally becoming and rising up to the person you were meant to become. So, how do you do this? Remember that courage is not that you're not scared. Courage is you're scared to death, but you do it anyways. You know, a couple of years ago, I had a feeling that I should write a book, and I never wanted to write a book. To be honest with you, that sounds like the worst thing in the world is to write a book. No, I did not want to write a book. Because sitting for 4 hours a day, writing a book for months on end sounded like chewing glass, in my opinion. I never desired to be an author. I've never really thought being an author was a cool thing. I was a speaker. I was happy being a speaker, and that was my identity. A speaker and an entrepreneur. I'm great with those 2 things. And I had this feeling, you should write a book. And I'm like, I'm not writing a book. Well, guess what? 1.5 years passes, a little under 1.5 years. And last September, I had this feeling again, Eric, you should write a book. By the way, here's the odd thing. I already knew what the book was going to be called, which is the crazy thing. I had this feeling of what it should be. So I'm sitting there last September and I get a phone call from Stephanie Blake. You remember Stephanie? She was on yesterday and she says, hey, Eric, would you help co-author a book with me? And I said, sure. She was getting a few contributors to write this book. And I said, sure, I'd be happy to. So I started working on a chapter in a book that wasn't necessarily my book. Then I get a call, this book right here, by the way, this is the one. Then I get a call 2 weeks later from somebody else and said, Eric, will you help co-author this book? For 40 years of my life, not a single person has ever asked me to write a chapter or co-contribute to a book ever. 2 times in 1 month. The first one in its category became a bestseller. The second one in its category became a global bestseller, which is right there inside the inner circle. Adora knows about that book. And so I realized okay, I need to do this. I finally need to do the thing that I feel that I'm called to do in addition to speaking, which this was totally unplanned. Do you think I wrote the book after all of that evidence, even though I knew I needed to do it? No. September passes, October passes, November passes, December passes, January, I'm like, oh my goodness, are you going to do this or not? Are you going to actually apply the principle that's inside the book and commit first? So on January 11th, yes, just 5 months ago, I went live to all of my social media channels and I said something to the effect of, guys, I am so excited to announce my book is coming out on May 11th. It's going to change lives. It's called Commit First, the key to unlock potential, break through obstacles, and achieve your impossible. And I said, go to commitfirstbook.com and you can pre-order the book today. I hadn't written a single word. Not one. Then I usually speak once or twice a week. And so every speaking engagement I've had since January 11th, and you know what I said? Guess what, guys? I got a book coming out on May 11th. You can pre-order it right now. It's going to change the world. You're going to love it, etc. Blah, blah, blah. And guess what? Guess why I chose the time of May 11th? Because that was the day of my live event in Nashville. Take a wild guess of what I told every attendee once they signed up that they would be getting on their chairs the day. Yes, by the way, yours was just shipped, Adora. I think you probably should get it today or tomorrow. The day that I was launching my live event was May 11th. And every person there, I told the same thing too. You know what I did? I created a path to make it harder for me not to write the book than to actually just write the dang book. I made it an easier path to fulfill my calling and a harder path to not fulfill it. Because do you think after I told all of these people and I showed up to a live event that I would ever show up without this thing? No. Why? Because it's against my identity. Because I gave my word. I told people about it. I made a public declaration. It would have been my integrity and frankly, extremely embarrassing to show up and say, oh, guess what, guys? I know I promised you a book, but this happened. I had a problem with the publisher. I had a problem writing it. My proofreaders didn't get it right. Whatever the excuse would have been, that would have never happened because of who I knew that I was. The principle of commit first is that you make this the path to everything that you want in life, your sole purpose, your program, whatever that might be for you, you commit to that first. And you make an easier path to keep the commitment and a harder path to create a commitment, to break the commitment. In other words, it's actually getting massive leverage on yourself. How can you get massive leverage on yourself to do the thing that you're actually meant to do? Number one, if it's launch your webinar, go live today and say, I'm going to launch this webinar on June 12th or whatever the day is, but make sure it's no more than 30 days in advance. Even if the program's not ready, even if you haven't created a single slide, even if you haven't done anything, you must go live today and say, this is what I'm doing. Back yourself into a corner, burn the boats, and create the only path to success, which is a path forward, not a path backwards. You have to get so clear about exactly what you want and then move forward towards that commitment, and everything will change for you. When I did my live event, I called Molly Bloom. I didn't call her. I messaged her on Instagram and I said, hey, I got a live event. It's going to happen next May. Do you want to be a part of it? Can you speak? And she's like, I was like shocked that she messaged me back on Instagram because this is Molly Bloom, right? She wrote Molly's Game, the book, and then she helped produce the movie with Aaron Sorkin, who did The West Wing and Passion of the Christ and a bunch of other really crazy, amazing movies. I didn't have a venue yet. I didn't have the dates yet. So her agent was asking me, okay, well, where is it? What's it all about? And I'm like, oh my gosh, now I got to actually get this thing going. I committed first. And I signed the contract to pay her to speak at my event before the event was even created, because I knew I needed to lock myself into that corner. In other words, create an easier path to actually do the thing I must do and a harder path to not do the thing that I must do. That's the power of commit first. But I'm going to give you, I know, five quick things that will help you commit to the thing that you must do. You guys want that? You guys want to hear what the 5 C's of commitment are? You want to hear about that? Al says, I want a copy of Commit First, Eric. Done. Al, would you message me on Instagram? My handle is right here on the screen. And send me your address and I will send you a signed book of Commit First. Not that my signature means anything, but I will do that absolutely. Who would like to know the 5 C's of commitment? It's interesting because when I was writing a book about commitment, I kept hearing people like Les Brown saying, commitment is the key. Dr. Benjamin Hardy says the key is commitment. All of these people over and over kept saying, nothing works unless you're committed. But the problem with what everyone was saying is commitment ended up being like the afterthought. So they would teach like the main thing, like, oh, you need to have clarity, you need to do this, you need to do that. Oh, by the way, none of it works if you're not committed. And I'm like, why is nobody focusing on the main thing? Why is nobody focusing on what commitment actually is? And I realized one reason. Commitment is boring. If I said, hey, at Project Uprise, we're going to talk about the power of commitment, you're going to be like, no, because that's easy. Who wants to learn about commitment? And then I started diving in. Nikki, you got it. Send me a message. You're in. So I started realizing that commitment wasn't what I thought it was. You see, most people believe that being committed is just saying that you'll do something. And the problem is we create a lot of commitments in our life, and whether or not we actually fulfill them is kind of not a big deal. Because, oh, things change, or, oh, I really shouldn't have committed in the first place. How many times have you ever told your friend, oh, I'd love to be able to go to dinner with you sometime, and you never do it? Right? Well, there was a study done about fading commitment in the United States. And you guys know commitment is fading. Like, it's unbelievable, especially in things like marriage. And do you know what the #1 reason for divorce in marriage is? I know what you're thinking. Is it cheating? No. Is it finances? No. Is it arguing? No. It was one thing. The #1 reason for divorce was marriage. Okay, I'm just trying to get a laugh out of you guys. Yes, I can promise you right now that if you never get married, you'll never get divorced. It is the proven framework to never get a divorce is to never get married. No, it was actually the lack of commitment. The lack of commitment was the #1 reason. 73% of marriages were born when they really dove into it. It wasn't the finances. It wasn't cheating. It wasn't that. It was lack of commitment, although cheating is a display of a lack of commitment, right? So when you realize that, you realize commitment isn't what you think it is. Here are the 5 C's of commitment that are absolutely key. And the first 2 are not going to surprise you. In fact, Les Brown alluded to it. Yesterday, he said, you must commit first. But then he said, Eric, there's actually one thing that I would do before committing first. And he said, I would create a vision of exactly what I want. And he's right. Because commitment only actually works when you do 2 things. #1, get absolutely clear about who you are and what you want. What do you want? And by the way, more and better are not clarity. More money, better outcomes, better audiences, better life is not a clear outcome. Saying, I want to make $2.5 million this year through this, and that, that's clarity. Saying, I want to get completely out of debt, the $138,000 or whatever your debt amount is by the end of December 31st, 2023, that's clarity. Like clarity, you must get really clear and really granular about what you're actually wanting. Do not dismiss this, because I promise you, if you don't know what you want, no road will get you there. Or put another way, maybe any road will. If you don't actually know what you want, you must get absolutely clear about what you want. Thank you, Jamie, for putting that chat 250K. Thank you, R. Smith. Motivational Radar, by the way, love the name. Motivational Radar, very cool. Commit first. Thank you for the love in the chat. Second C is you must connect to your purpose. Once you are clear about what you want and clear about who you are, then you can connect to that purpose, which in other words, as Les Brown said yesterday, your vision. What is your vision for not the goal necessarily? Because creating and fulfilling a goal is really not about doing. It's about who you must become to be the type of person that would accomplish that goal. In other words, create a vision of your future self that is crystal clear. Have you ever spent a day in the life of your future self 10 years from now? I have. I know exactly where he's waking up, the car he's driving, the business that he owns, the audience that he's impacted. Why? Because I see it in my mind and I rehearse it. Because that future self is who I am trying to become, so that the day I die, the person I am is the person I could have become. They're the same person. That is my ultimate goal in life. And how do I do it? By waking up business owners and entrepreneurs to the potential that they have and help them rise to the potential that they have. How do I do it? Through live events, through the spoken word that creates transformation, that brings people into my world, and then I can help change their lives once they commit to a program, which is ultimately committing to themselves. That's what it's all about. But you must connect with your purpose. Number 3, commit first. In other words, as I said earlier, make an easier path to make your commitment and a harder path to break the commitment. How do you do that? Make a public declaration, sign the contract, call the person you need to call. Do something that really creates leverage on yourselves. It's the equivalent of Cortez in 1514. When he went to take the island, he instructed his general to burn the boats, because the only way they would ever leave the island, if they did that, was either die or defeat the enemy and take their boats and go home. Make it so the path to you going to your home in the future is the only way. That you make it easier to keep that commitment. That's the third C. Now, there's 2 principles, 3 really, inside of commit first that you need to know about. Number 1 is the 80-20 principle. And that's this Pareto principle, which is 80% of your results, or I should say 20% of your results come from 80% of your, sorry, I'm saying this exactly the wrong way. 80% of the things that you are doing are actually only creating 20% of your results. And 20% of the things you're doing are creating 80% of your results. In other words, you're spending a lot more time in the 80% activities that are actually not moving the needle towards the thing you must become and the things you must do. And 20% of the time in the things that you should be doing. The reality is, when you study entrepreneurs, it's more like 95-5, maybe 10. 5 or 10% of the actions you're taking are actually making a difference towards the thing you must do. 80% activities are things like meetings, are things like distractions, going on social media, doing everything you can except for the thing that you must do in order to become the person you were meant to become. In this book, 10X is easier than 10X, we call that 2X activity. 2X activity is hustle, it's activity. But the problem is I was that way for so long that I ended up doing things all day. And by the end of the day, I didn't actually get anything done. In other words, I didn't do anything that was moving the needle towards my business. You must eliminate all things that aren't directly tied to you accomplishing the thing that you must become. And how do you know that? Because number 1, when you do them, you don't want to do them. You procrastinate them. Why? Because they're not aligned with your calling. Procrastination is a gift. It's telling you that you're doing the thing that you should not do. It doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, but somebody that has a clear vision, they know the what and they know the why, will find a who for the how. You must find a who for the how, whether that be leveraging a technology, whether that be hiring an employee or a VA or whatever that might be. You've got to move away from that 80% of empty activity. Empty because it actually doesn't get you towards your goal, but it makes you feel like you do. It gives you a false sense of a reality because you're moving, but you're actually moving, yet standing still at the same time. It's like you're pacing back and forth, not actually getting anywhere. When you start focusing on the 20%, the things that actually matter, the things that will actually get to the goal that you want to have, then everything changes for you. Second thing is the 99% or the 100% rule of commitment. So Dr. Clayton Christensen of Harvard taught that 100% committed is actually easier than 98% committed. And I remember this when I was a kid, when I grew up with 4 other brothers. And when I was in trouble and I did something they didn't like, inevitably it would end up in them chasing me all around the house. And I knew that if I could get to my door and slam it shut, there was no way they could get in because they'd have to break the door. And they weren't going to do that because my parents would get really upset at them. But inevitably, every single time when I didn't make it, I wasn't fast enough, and the door was 1 or 2% open, every time they were able to overpower me. They were bigger than me. and swing the door wide open. And it bothered me that such a tiny detail made such a difference. Well, guess what? Being 100% committed is much easier than being 99% or less committed. Here's why. Let's say your goal is to make it easy, is to quit sugar. Well, how often do you have to make a decision every day whether or not you're going to consume sugar? Do you have cereal in your pantry? Have you ever gone to a restaurant? Do you want a soda? Do you want a dessert? When you're 99% or less committed, you have to make a decision every day whether or not you're going to consume sugar in this case. And that leads to something called decision fatigue. You want to know why 100% committed is easier than 99% or less committed? Because you have to make the decision one time. James Clear talks about how that's tied to your actual identity. Instead of saying, I'm going to quit smoking, you say, I am not a smoker. One's an identity, one's an action. Identity is the most powerful thing that you ever have, and it is two things. It is your standards, and it is your stories. Your standards must be committing 100%. What does that mean? That means you need to uncommit to commit. There's no way you can be 100% committed to the thing that you're most called to be if you're committed to lesser goals or lesser things that aren't either going to get you there or are distractions to that goal. Once you know who you are, you're going to start saying no a lot more to things. And so when you realize what you were meant to do and what you were meant to become, all of a sudden, now you can start uncommitting to lesser commitments. Uncommit to commit. Because again, there's no way you'll be able to accomplish the thing you want to if you're involved in a ton of things. If you have all these little commitments that are taking up your time. Stephen Covey gave a different example of this. He would always take this jar, this glass jar, this big glass jar, and he would have small rocks and big rocks. When you pour all the little small rocks first into the jar, and then you put the big rocks on top, guess what happens? They never fit. When you reverse that, you take the big rocks, you put them inside of the jar, and then you put the small rocks on top of them, they always fit. And he said, put first things first. So when you commit to something that is your sole purpose, that it is your program, it's the thing that's going to make the influence, the impact, and the income that you've always dreamed of for in your life and in the lives of others, commit first to that one thing. Then uncommit to everything else that is not completely in harmony with that. In other words, it's 10x thinking versus 2x thinking. Here's the problem. 10x and or 100% committed is actually not about adding things. It's more about taking away. There's an amazing story in chapter 1 of this book, 10x is easier than 2x, and it's about Michelangelo and his progress towards what he became. And when the Pope asked him about the statue of David, which has been widely known as one of the most remarkable things in the ever created on earth, like the perfect piece of art, the Pope asked Michelangelo and said, tell me how you created such a masterpiece. You know what his answer was? He said, it was easy. All I had to do was take away everything that wasn't the David. Most of the reason why you're not where you want to be right now is not because you need to do something else. It's because you're committed to so many other things that you need to get rid of them. It is so much more about removing the obstacles in your path than it is marching on the path itself. I had to remove my limitations, remove the limiting beliefs when I spent that 50 grand. I had to remove who I thought I was. I had to remove the things that were holding me back from becoming the person I was meant to become. And then, and only then, when I uncommitted to the things that I shouldn't have committed to, and I committed to the one thing that would make the difference and removed everything else, guess what? My entire life changed. So now I know who I am. I am here, as I mentioned earlier, to help create transformation, and my vehicle is live events. That's how I can get to 100K days. Now, here is the great news about all of this. I know that in a 3-day event, you're going to get so many gold nuggets. We're talking a lot of mindset. We're talking practical applications of mindset as well. But I also know that after every event, Monday comes. And you're sitting there going, what an incredible event. It was absolutely insane. It was amazing. And then you're sitting there thinking, well, it was great. But now I get I'm going to get pulled back into my normal life. The old self will pull you immediately back. And then 2 months later, you thought, remember that event I had a couple of months ago where I had some really good ideas? What were those ideas? I should have implemented those because my life would have probably changed by now. It is so hard sometimes because we get pulled back to our old self because that's what's familiar to us. That's what we know. That's the person that we always have been. But what will get you, what got you here will not get you there. It requires a different set of mindset, a different skill set to level up to that area. And by committing first to the person you know that you can become and removing that 80%, removing those things from you, you watch how your world will swing